Yes, it is on. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm just going to take off my glasses for now so that I can just see everybody. Okay, now I can see. All right, I can put my glasses back on now. I know what the faces look like. Don't worry, I'll be able to see if you're falling asleep as well, but we will make sure that doesn't happen. A very good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this session, which is, of course, a session that celebrates women in science. I'm very proud that I've been asked to moderate this session. We will try to keep it to an hour because I think there's a lot of time that's been eaten into, and we need to try and recover some time. And there's so much to be said, but we'll just get cracking with it. And let me just give a little bit of background before I introduce the esteemed panelists that I'm very fortunate to be able to moderate the session with. The North-South partnerships have enabled various countries to effectively respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're actually talking about this in the other session just now. And the theme of the 2021 convention, Advancing Africa's Biomanufacturing Value Chains Through Innovation, was chosen by the organizing committee in response to the global push for local manufacturing of critical health products, such as diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. And of course, we all know that this push is still ongoing. As I was saying, we just had this very, very provocative panel discussion on the various elements that we still need to very much dismantle in order to actually realize our goal of producing our own biotech on this continent. And now the theme for 2022, Africa Resilience, Life Sciences Innovation for Achieving Health and Food Security, captures the essence of the platform's strategic agenda and long-term vision. And this convention has been an effective platform for establishing fruitful dialogue amongst various stakeholders. During the COVID-19 response, the role of women in science leadership was critical, and this was demonstrated by the number of women who were vice presidents, health ministers, and heads of institutions, and in my case, who communicated to the country and, in fact, the rest of the world on COVID-19. Furthermore, women were at the forefront of research and development, clinical evaluation of vaccines and therapies, and regulatory oversight. The panel that we've invited today will discuss the topic, an Africa-centric dialogue on product development partnerships. So it really is an honor for me to have three amazing ladies to actually discuss this with. And the reason why I'm sitting here is because there's only one lady with us on stage and two of them are joining us online. And I just thought, you know, sisters don't abandon each other, one going to a podium while one is sitting behind. It just doesn't work that way. So I'd rather sit right here next to this beautiful woman, Dr. Michelle McMurray, who is President and CEO of BIO. She will be providing a point of view of BIO, which is effectively advocating for a much more constructive approach drawn from an arsenal of strategic options such as voluntary licenses and sounding an alarm on the other parts of the value chain which require investments and upstream investments and are not really covered by the patents. I'm going to assume that means that that was the starting bell. And then let's see if we can get Dr. Ebere Ogere online, if everybody can see her. I've actually been exceptionally fortunate to work with Dr. Ogere. Hi, Dr. Ogere, how are you? Been very, very fortunate to work with this incredible lady who's currently the Senior Technical Advisor of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and an Honorary Senior Public Health Advisor to the Africa CDC. And that is the capacity in which I've been able to interact with her. And she's a public health physician specializing in global health security and health system strengthening, who has won awards for her work promoting women and underrepresented groups in public health and leadership. And then finally, we have Raquel Ricardo, who is the Director of Global Representation in Clinical Research at Amgen, where she leads a team that is dedicated to improving the diversity and proportional representation of patients from historically excluded groups in Amgen's clinical research programs. I hope we can also get to see this beautiful lady Good afternoon to you, and lovely that you could join us. Thank you so very much. So I'm not going to start just yet with all of these technical questions. I think I'd like to start with a bit of inspiration. And I'm going to ask Dr. McMurray and Dr. Ebere a question, and I'm also going to ask the same of Dr. Raquel, but I do believe Dr. Raquel also has a presentation. So she can answer my question, and then she can then just move straight onto her presentation. So, Dr. McMurray, I just have one question for you. How did you get here? You know, if you could just give us 5 minutes of your history and your life and how, in fact, you ended up where you are right now.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and both of my parents were in public health. And I grew up seeing how public health could really contribute to social progress. You know, Oakland is one of those cities that maybe a little bit like Durban sometimes struggles with its reputation, but has a beautiful set of people and vistas and promise. And so my parents were really invested in trying to build up Oakland using public health. And so when I went off to college, I thought, well, maybe I'll do something in that vein, but I also fell in love with the lab bench, and I loved pursuing biomedical research as well. And so I went on from Harvard to Duke, where I did an MD, PhD, combining medicine and molecular immunology.
Oh, wow.
And I loved that. But I also got to see how dependent our laboratory system was on federal funding, and how, despite that, the scientists did not have necessarily a sense of responsibility to the people who were funding their research. And so that question has driven me since then. So I've worked in science policy over 25 years now on Capitol Hill and at the US Food and Drug Administration and at J&J, and then coming to Bio a few years ago.
Wow. Now, it's interesting that you tell me that your parents were in public health, you know, and how obviously that's played a major influence in your life. And the beauty of it is that you are continuing this tradition by passing it on to your daughter. So I just want to share that Dr. McMurray was telling me that she's brought a 10-year-old daughter here, and in fact she has been attending some earlier sessions in this convention. And I just find that just to be incredible, and I want to just congratulate you for really, you know, we talk a lot about generational curses, but you clearly are advancing an issue of generational values, you know, and protecting, you know, the future generations by just exposing them, you know, to these kinds of inspirational conferences. So really, thank you very much for that, and I'm really very happy for your daughter that you are her mother. Dr. Ebere online, how is it that a beautiful African woman is working for the Tony Blair Institute? Give us the highlights, the highlight package.
Highlights. I attended medical school in Nigeria, and I had the privilege of being raised by parents who liked to travel. And so as a child, we visited most of the countries in West Africa. I think 10 out of 15 West African countries. We spent most of our summer holidays traveling across Cairo or to visit Africa. So I'm not a travel dog. And so after 6 years in medical school, when you hardly had any time off,
another one, advancing generational blessings. But let's come to, let me pick up on what you were saying about that all-important political will and our ability to speak to politicians. And it's all about getting the politicians to be able to communicate the message back. And I must say that as a communicator, that was a skill that I really had to learn. I had to learn to change the language that I was speaking as a doctor and make it relatable to politicians. We think politicians, because they're politicians, that they're smart people and all of that. No, they're just ordinary people. Many of them aren't in our sector, and they need to themselves be enabled to actually communicate with their constituencies. So that was really a very particular skill that I learned, and it is absolutely critical. Without it, we would not have been able to actually manage the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Raquel, how is it that you are at Amgen, and where have you come from?
That's also a very long story, which seems to be the theme among us. I think that's important because I think what brings us to the work that we do now, never a straight path, because it gives us the experience that we need to do the kind of work that we're all doing. I grew up in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the United States, which if you aren't familiar with, is one of the most racially segregated cities in the country. And I'm also a first-generation American with immigrant parents who came here to work in medicine and build a new life for us as a family. So I've always been influenced by those experiences, and in a family and community tradition of community service, which really led me to following this path in science and public health in particular. My background is in journalism, biology, and public health. My professional background is about 15 years or so of clinical research in the life sciences, but this has also included public health research, which has always been focused on disparities in health access and outcomes, particularly those that are driven by race and gender. I believe that because industry has such a major role in human research, it inherently plays a role in public health. And so I find myself working not only in public health, but also in clinical research together in the role that I have now. Because we know that the work that we work on in diversity in clinical trials is not only a business challenge and a social justice challenge, but we really believe it's a scientific imperative, which I really become passionate about leading. But at the same time, also passionate about empowering women and people of color to work in innovation in STEM and other lives. I'm really thrilled to talk about that work and be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues today.
Well, thank you so much. What I find really interesting about all of these stories is the first thing is that all of these women are rooted in community. They grew up in a certain community, they looked around and they saw certain injustices in their community and decided that they were going to actually do something about it. They decided they were going to skill themselves first of all, and then that they were going to go back to those communities and fix all of these things that they are seeing. And the reason why I mention this is because I think it was in 2015 that Georgetown University, that I happen to be associated with now, produced a paper that showed that women have got a much higher propensity to reinvest their earnings. So they were talking in terms of actual money, currency, their earnings, up to 90% reinvestment back into their immediate communities, as opposed to men who tend to only reinvest about 30 to 40%. But what they didn't capture in that paper is the energy and the passion and the skill and the expertise and the acumen that women also tend to actually reinvest in their communities. So I really just wanted to celebrate that, and thank you all so much for the incredible work that you do and for the work that you have done during this pandemic, which was so very difficult for us all. But with our women, we're able to actually prevail in the end. So, Dr. McMurray, I'm going to come back to you, and now let's get really into the nitty-gritties of the technicalities of what we want to discuss here. The first question I have for you is that the bioconvention in the US took place in June 2022, right? And this was the time when communication was shared about the TRIPS waiver for access to IP by low and middle income countries. We had a conversation about the role of TRIPS, what actually happened in the past 2 years that brought us to summer place, and we were talking about the fact that the same people who are members of the World Trade Organization are also members of the UN and have signed up to the SDGs, and they can no longer separate the issues. So I would really like to get your views on, on this particular matter, your honest opinion about how you think it's unfolded, and the role of the World Trade Organization in future as we prepare for future pandemics, and then also when we have to then respond to future pandemics.
It's such a complicated issue, and I know there's a lot of strong feelings on all sides of the issue, but I come back to trying to make sure that we have the investment needed in every stage of science to get the cures we're waiting for diseases that disproportionately impact people of color. And that goes for infectious diseases, it goes for chronic diseases like sickle cell that I touched on a bit this morning. And what those areas have shared in previous decades is a belief that there is no way to recoup your investment if you invest in those areas. That the patients cannot pay for the solutions, that they won't be interested in the healthcare system, that they won't take part in clinical trials, that you'll put in all this blood, sweat, and tears, and there'll be no opportunity to even recoup what you've invested. And if you think about the fact that only 1 in 10 biotech companies in the healthcare space actually succeeds, and many people don't realize that during the first 2 years of the COVID pandemic, there were over 1,000 biotech research and development projects started to address COVID, either prevention or curing. Over 280 vaccines were attempted, and which now we have less than a dozen that have actually made it to market. And I am so grateful that we have that dozen, but imagine if the investors that supported those 1,000 research and development projects knew at the outset that there was absolutely no way to succeed, they would not have invested in that research. I look at Dr. Ted Love from Global Blood Therapeutics that I talked about this morning, who has found one of the first treatments for sickle cell in decades, and who got $1 billion worth of venture capital to invest in his business and bring a drug to market. And his company has just been sold to Pfizer for $5.4 billion. Pfizer is now going to invest more than that to try to make sure that that product is available around the world, and that it sees every patient that needs it. You only get that type of interest and investment if there is some chance, even a small one, that you can recoup your investment at the end of the day. So while I understand that it's been heartbreaking to see people waiting on vaccines, and I know that we have to do so much better, I think we also have to look very carefully at where the rate-limiting steps were. I do think it gets back to politics. If you look at how the US government put in place the Defense Production Act at the beginning of the pandemic, which actually prevented our American companies that were based in the US from exporting doses until they had fulfilled their orders to the US government. So they had doses, for example, I remember hearing from the Costa Rican delegation, we've already placed our orders, we can't get our orders filled because the US government is stopping doses at the border. We saw something similar in India. The nationalism that we see during these crises is the real root of the problem of trying to get doses everywhere in the world. So we have to be committed to breaking down those political barriers so that more people have access sooner, and we have to make sure that there is a widely distributed global footprint of vaccine manufacturing capabilities so that those national political games can play a lot smaller role in who gets treated first.
And in fact, I think it was the Lancet that showed that had we attained a 20% across the board, we would have actually saved, I think it was like 60% more lives. And had we attained 40% across the board, we would have saved like 111 or 112% more lives. So, the argument even is mathematical,
Right.
If that's what appeals to you.
And also the fact that we've, years previous, the most number of vaccine doses that have been produced globally was about 2 to 3 billion doses. We've now produced 12 billion COVID vaccine doses globally. That's enough to vaccinate the entire world twice. it's not a question of the doses not being manufactured. It's a question of the doses not being distributed, of healthcare systems not being supported to make sure that the doses are delivered.
No, absolutely, indeed. Dr. Ebre, you know, Africa CDC has played a significant role in championing discussions around vaccine manufacturing on the continent. And the fundamental issue is, of course, the issue of access, you know. Just to dovetail straight off of what Dr. Mario is talking about, we've experienced this now over and over again as Africa. We experienced it in the HIV pandemic, we experienced it in the Ebola pandemic, we're even experiencing it now with the monkeypox outbreak. With the vaccines that were stockpiled, only getting mobilized after monkeypox was actually spreading in the north. Whereas during the COVID-19 pandemic, we recorded, during that very period, we recorded about 10,000 cases. Nobody moved any stockpiles. So we've decided then as a continent that the best way to deal with this is that we must increase our manufacturing capacity. You've played a hugely important role in this regard. So I'd really like you to share your thoughts on the opportunities that you see for the continent. But what I would like you to do, though, because I want to actually pick up on a conversation that we were having at the last session, and that is the imperative of member states to actually drive the manufacturing agenda by ensuring that they prioritize African products. I'd like you to focus on that aspect, of the one political will, but also even the economic will of African member states to really ensure that, the market remains robust for our bush-running manufacturing sector on the continent.
Thank you, Dr. Banzi. And where to start? Now, we talk a lot about manufacturing as if it's just, build a factory somewhere and start churning drugs out. Particularly with vaccines, but with most pharmaceutical and medical products anyway, there's a very complex ecosystem that needs to exist for you to actually have a successful production manufacturing business. And that's what the Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing that was established by, and is developing out of the African Union is trying to do. And so that's actually about stepping back and saying, okay, as a continent, what do we need to ensure that if we start to manufacture whatever vaccines they are, that we can actually get from the R&D, whether it's tech transfer or IP or whatever, or actually starting from scratch all the way to getting vaccines into people's arms. And so to do that, the partnership has looked at and defined what it's called a series of bold programs. First and foremost, one which is actually about having a coordinated agenda for the continent, defining what are the priorities that what are the types of vaccines and diseases that we need to produce vaccines of, therefore centering our own continental needs in the middle of this ecosystem. Recognizing that whatever manufacturing architecture we develop here isn't just for Africa, it will contribute
Exactly.
to what is defined as the distributed manufacturing system for the continent. So what we need to start from in principle, what do we need? Define the priorities, and then what are the other things we then need to have in place so that when we do start manufacturing, we can actually produce products that are needed, that meet the global standards, and can get to our people. So we looked at the both programs to look at how do we ensure that we strengthen our regulatory architecture, how do we develop the R&D, both in terms of the defining the out how to manufacture vaccines for us on in the continent? Can they be assured of access to market in Botswana? And that does require us to then come back to the political space, because it's not just about saying this needs to happen and the private sector has stepped up to say, okay, we will work to develop this industry, but you need to provide us with some assurances that we can reach our market. And so that comes back again to the politics. The politicians have to commit to say, it isn't us, all of us competing about with ourselves, as was mentioned in the earlier plenary before this one. Vaccine manufacturing is an expensive industry, and we don't need to have all 55 or 80 countries manufacturing, but we do need to invest in those countries that do and ensure that we can actually give access to them. We have the situation in South Africa at the moment where there was all the concern about the J&J vaccines that were being produced that couldn't get to market. And there were, I think, particular factors around the timing and the agreements that were made at the time that affected that. But it is a salient lesson that we need to address collaboratively. And this is the reason why the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing is taking every step of its recommendations through the AU system to the AU heads of government to say, you need to endorse this approach and agree to work collectively if we actually going to make this happen. And that does require countries to say, to make decisions about where they buy their vaccines. Now, we have to step back for a little bit of reality, because a lot of our vaccines are bought for us in the continent through Gavi, for example. We know that African governments, and I think this is universal, some are better than others, are significantly underinvesting in the health system. Too often, we see health as a luxury. We should see it as a primary investment in development. And that means putting a little bit more money into our priority system.
Yeah, indeed, because I wanted to just push you a little bit there and say to you that, our leaders will come to us and say, no, I believe, but I don't have the money, I just don't have the money. And you also right now are producing low volumes. You have a premium as well because you're producing low volumes. What do you want me to do? China says they're going to give me everything I need, for much less. What do you say to them? What are the practical, and I think that part of what you're talking about, increasing health spend, I'm going to just cover you for a minute here and just say, fine, let's invoke Abuja and let's do what needs to be done for Abuja. But what do you then say, if when they come back to you and they say, no, but I don't have the money and I can't really accommodate your premium and your low volumes aren't going to help me?
Right. Well, interestingly, there's been some recent studies looking at the increase in investment in health as a consequence of the COVID pandemic. And interestingly, the higher income countries their increase in investment has been single figures, less than 10% for most of them. While for low income countries, in particular African countries, the increase in investment has been double figures. So the reality is that the outbreaks, the epidemics, the pandemics cost us more. And so we need to
And this, you've taken us back to, exactly the kind of work that you're doing, about communicating these complex health and economic intersecting issues to politicians to help them understand, what it means to actually invest in good outcomes and what it means, for actually the economic outcomes. So Dr. Raquel, I'm coming to you now. And I don't know much about MGen Rise. I just read a little bit before I came here. So we'd actually like for you to just share with us what the program is about, the MGen Rise program, and why this program was established.
Sure, and I will forego the slide decks. I think it's nicer to have a discussion with us speaking
Thank you.
as we can here, just in interest of time as well. So hopefully that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you.
Regarding Rise and the team at Amgen, for those of you that are not familiar yet with this, we know that there's recognized differences in the incidence of disease among racial and ethnic groups and differences in exposure and response to medicines. But participant populations in clinical trials globally remain predominantly white. And this underrepresentation leads to the collection of incomplete or even limited trial data, limited access to innovative treatments to vulnerable populations, and really contributes to the disparities in healthcare and health outcomes. Now, this push for more diversity and inclusion in clinical trials isn't new to Amgen, but we accelerated our efforts right around 2020 with the formation of RISE, which actually is short for representation in clinical research. And this is a team that is dedicated solely to addressing the systemic issues that deter people from participating in research, especially those who have been historically excluded due to race, ethnicity, sex, age, and other factors. So really that's why Amgen RISE came to be. In fact, the work led by RISE has been developing for several years now due to a growing internal interest at our organization in determining how Amgen can proactively reduce disparities in research and contribute to advancing health equity. So I want to highlight that a bit too, because we're talking a little bit about diversity and inclusion within organizations. And RISE really grew out of a grassroots effort of like-minded Amgen colleagues under the umbrella of an employee resource group, or an ERG, which is called the Amgen Black Employee Network around 2016. So this was really a group of cross-functional experts that really had a passion for change, an employee resource group that incubated this idea to become a reality, and executive leaders that were fully supportive of driving RISE creation. And it was formed to accelerate the work that the Amgen Black Employee Network began, and as COVID-19 laid bare some of these health and healthcare inequities, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement, which gained momentum after the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other people of color. And so during this time, our CEO, Bob Bradway, called for the need to do better as a company, and really gave RISE a heightened priority. Now, our mission aligns with Amgen's overall mission, which is above all to serve patients, but we have a special focus on diversity and representation of underrepresented populations in Amgen's clinical research. And so our strategy is really rooted in what's called community-based participatory research. It should be familiar to all of you on the call and the audience that are familiar with public health, really keeping our broader health equity commitments in mind. And so we have 3 objectives for the RISE program. One is to exceed the industry enrollment benchmarks for proportional representation. The second is to really build that internal and external infrastructure that is critical to sustainably support this work, as well as collaborating with partners across the organization and across the ecosystem of research to pursue our broader health equity commitments. We've seen success so far to expand our efforts globally, and that includes in countries on the continent of Africa. We've already begun our work on the continent with key experts and partners, one of course being Bio, really with the keen interest in respecting biosample and data sovereignty. And so there's some key activities that underpin this work, but some of the critical ones, of course, are joining with patients and their communities as partners, and really as leaders to co-create this research, supporting inclusive research throughout the clinical trial life cycle as early as possible, and of course continuing to drive this cross-industry collaboration that we're seeing today in order to affect genuine change. And that includes playing key roles in every cross-industry initiative working on this topic, including the several panels that you'll see this week and then talks that we're having today.
Wow. I mean, the work that you're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion in research, it cannot be overstated how critical that kind of work is, particularly when you consider on the continent of Africa, the idiosyncrasies that, people of color, I mean, most of us are black here, but also our women, our youth, and our children, actually that separate them from the rest of the continent. So if you don't actually, I remember when I was a medical student, there were a lot of interventions that we knew for sure are not going to work for our people. We just knew it instinctively, but we didn't have the research that is diverse and inclusive to actually support our instincts. So your work is absolutely critical. But what I'd like to do, I'm going to just kind of step away a little bit from biotech, and I want to pick up on one of the critical pillars of the new public health order, which is the health workforce. Now, the health workforce, without the health workforce, we can forget about all of our biotech innovations, because it's the health workforce that must ultimately deliver it to the people whom we are treating. And coming to the health workforce, we know that the health workforce comprises 70% women. However, those 70% women are not the leaders, they're not the innovators, they're not the policy makers, the decision makers. They're not even, okay, well now it's better, now there's 60% doctors, I think, but they didn't used to be even, the doctors and, kind of the leaders of the actual front line. And I think there's still a lot more work to do in that regard. And I was wondering at Amgen, when it comes to health workforce, how is it that you interact with, key stakeholders in the health workforce development space, particularly sovereign states and governments, to ensure that there's a gender-sensitive response to health workforce development?
I think that's a really great question, because having an organizational culture around diversity and inclusion is so critical to how an entity runs and the things that they do, and the way that they even design interventions and devices and things like that get out into the public. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can entrench principles of diversity and inclusion within our institutions as we're women in leadership roles. One of those I already mentioned was these employer resource groups that are important to large
and said humility underlies all virtues, you know. At the time I didn't understand what he was saying, but what he was saying is that if you are humble, you can see, you can hear, you can feel, you can relate. And then when you're bold, you're actually able to take the message that people are delivering to you and you're able to deliver it to and speak truth to power and then actually affect change. So I really, really like the way that you have based it on those very, very important virtues, and then from there you actually build on. So I just want to check before, because it looks like we're now running out of time, I just want to check there are some mics around if there's any questions from the audience, and if there is, please just stand up and just go straight to the mic. I'll just give it a few seconds.
And while they do that, can I just
Yes,
add
while
something?
somebody's walking up, please go ahead, Dr. Murray.
The comments were so provocative just now, and I just wanted to also say that we also have to acknowledge that it's a rough path. That, you know, women and people of color and scientists that are both women and people of color have friction as they're navigating this path, and we have to remember to keep putting that hand behind us to bring more with us. We had our Bio International Convention in June, and there were 14,000 people from 50 countries. And I can count the number of women who came up and just wanted to hug me, but also were crying. And they were crying not because they hadn't found their way into science or they hadn't trained themselves in science, but because the path to get there had taken so much out of them. And we have to do more to make sure that those coming behind us have a smoother and smoother path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have to agree with Dr. Murray there, because it is a traumatic experience to stay, even if you get to leadership, to be able to stay in leadership, often as the unicorn, the only black woman, X, Y, Z, is draining and is exhausting. And some of the work that we're doing, and I totally identify with what Dr. Ricardo said about supporting each other, is actually building these networks of women of color, and my focus, mine is specifically women in Africa and African diaspora, to support each other, to see each other, to know where someone who's sharing their journey is, and you can reach out, learn from each other, and just say, I see you, I understand the challenges and experiences that you're having, been there, done that, these are the tools that I use. Interesting, because a recent report by UNESCO that actually showed that Africa had the highest proportion of women who are science graduates. 47% of our science graduates are women in Africa. But that doesn't then translate into leadership positions
Yes.
in science and in industry. And that is the question, why is that? What are those barriers? How do we dismantle those barriers? Because it's not that women don't have the knowledge or the skill. They are systematic obstructions in the way
Exactly.
for women to get
Yeah.
stage. And that is where we need to focus our attention.
Well, that was a revelation. I didn't know that, and we definitely have a lot of work to do. I see that there's a lady here, but I just wanted to say, I know I didn't introduce myself earlier, but one of the reasons why I feel so inspired and affirmed by being in this panel, listening to these inspirational stories, is that, you know, my own story is also very non-linear. I graduated as a doctor. I then decided to go into the film and television industry for 7 years after I'd been practicing as an emergency doctor for 12 years, very, very different. But then my skills then culminated into me being the spokesperson for the Minister of Health, and now currently doing my job as the head of Secretariat of the AU COVID-19 Commission. And that journey was incredibly lonely, especially when I was transitioning into the film and television industry. It was lonely. And during my time, and certainly it's true for the film and industry now, male-dominated industry, male-dominated industry. I'm in leadership now, it's still very male-dominated. So when I'm surrounded by women like yourselves, you know, who share similar stories and who have also taken non-linear paths to where they are now in positions of leadership, it says to me, firstly, that I've arrived as a person, but it also just says to me that, you know, it's so critical for us to really ensure that we also permit others who would actually like to take these non-linear paths to take them. And when I hear this 47%, and you know, I'm not seeing it, you know, in the actual industry, so we really have quite a lot of work to do. Please introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kanisile Butelezi. I'm a master's student at Greenwich University, and I have a comment women leaders who basically take the model of dominance and patriarchy and basically make the ones at the bottom feel like they have to kind of grovel for funding or, to get to where they are, or they feel like it's competition, And it's incredibly important to realize that it's a collaboration, basically. So my question to everyone is, how do we navigate the feelings of competition or competitiveness amongst ourselves as women, and the ones that are marginalized, young students, pioneers who don't see themselves or see themselves in you, but then when they are encountered with you are feeling a little bit insignificant, or how do we increase self-esteem and confidence in women in STEM and queer people in STEM, because recently we were told that some people were unqualified to even be here. Having to hear those words from a doctor is very, what can I say, is disheartening, because we all work hard to get to collaborate. We all, so it was extremely disheartening. And how do we limit those types of interactions and discourage fellow women from coming up and be like, or to carry on, basically, to be also inspiration. Thank you. I don't know if that was articulate enough.
No, thank you so much for that question. So what I'm going to actually do is, I don't think there's somebody else who wanted a question. I'm going to actually ask that as you answer the question, then you make that your closing remarks. But I do want to make a comment that I have found that when I'm moderating these kinds of sessions that focus on women, this question is coming up more and more and more. And to be honest with you, I think one of the most difficult spaces I have worked in since I have been doing, more than just, clinical medicine, is the gender space. Working with other women on gender issues, I have found this to be incredibly challenging, and it's exactly about what you are talking about. So I'm really glad that you were honest and you raised a very, very honest question. Because it is actually becoming, I guess, as more and more women are becoming more and more exposed, then of course, then there's that element of competition, and then the toxicity comes with it. So that will be our closing remarks. We'll start with you, Dr. McMurray.
Well, it was such a brave question, and thank you so much for standing up and saying it. And the sad truth is, not everyone who looks like you will be with you. Many of them are on their own personal journey to coming to terms with the trauma of getting to where they were. And not everyone is ready to acknowledge how rough that path has been, and until you can't smooth it out for others. In fact, you can make it often worse. And so we have to do everything we can to wrap our arms around them, to move from a sense of lack and scarcity when it comes to succeeding in the STEM fields, and make it clear that, there's this beautiful room of, amazing, mostly women of color who have really stuck through, and we have to shine a light on that so that the people coming behind us can see that there's a path. But the other thing I would say, to insulate yourself from some of that really, violence is what you're describing, is to reach to the younger students behind you. Tell them about your path, tell them that it hasn't been easy, expose yourself in that way, in that humble way, and they will give you strength. They will give you strength in just seeing what you've accomplished, in acknowledging the progress and your achievements. That will arm you for those unfortunate battles that still exist.
Alec Baldwin said that until you tell the truth to yourself about yourself, you become trapped in it. So I think that's exactly what you talk about. Then it becomes a cycle. Let's turn to Dr. Ebere Okere. The final words to respond to that question.
Yeah, it was again, thank you for actually answering that question and extending some of that belief that we have to compete for other women with other women for a much smaller proportion of the cake, rather than actually saying, actually, you need to give us more so there is less competition. And also, we tend to model the behaviors we see. Like Dr. Mary said, some of it is the consequence of the journeys those women have experienced themselves. And how we change it is actually by actually showing our own different approaches, showing different perspectives, being open to share our journey and how we've weathered the storms and got to where we are, being willing to be publicly vulnerable in front of other women so that they can actually see through the challenges to the strength that we all have to make the journey. I'm on the steering committee for the Kofi Annan Fellowship for Global Health Leadership, which is an Africa CDC program aiming to build up global health leaders on the African continent. And it's a recent program. We're in our second cohort now. And again, reflecting those statistics in that we have a lot of women who apply. And in applications, we have the ratio of 2 to 1 for men to women applying. But by selection, we actually have equal numbers of men and women, showing that there are a lot of women who are qualified and competent. And what we offer in the program, besides the traditional, not how are you an effective leader, is networks and support and exposure to a diversity of women leaders and men leaders to show that the leadership model does not necessarily have to be the one you saw, that there are different other approaches to leadership. And building mentoring networks from at different stages of career so that a young leader can find a peer mentor and can find a more experienced mentor in their field to learn and grow with. Because I say it's not learning from, you learn and grow with, because learning is two-way. I learn as much from my mentors as my mentees, as I hope they learn from me. So it is so important that we are visible. And I must mention, we're an all-female panel. We also need to mention our male allies. And there are a couple of particular African leaders in health that I want to name one, particularly, and he knows I name him all the time, and that's Dr. Bitiki Gitagi, who is the CEO of AMREF, and his position that he will not take a seat on a panel. If there are women if this is a mixed panel on any subject, he will not take a seat. That's allyship. We also need men to mentor women, to bring them into those spaces where they would otherwise not let us step in. So it is a complex issue, but I think that the more women we start to see in leadership programs, the more diverse styles of leadership we see, the less we actually see the continuation of what Dr. Nambuati described as generational trauma, passing from one generation to another. We start to see that you can actually make that leadership journey without the damage.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Gitaki. You know, he's actually here in the country. I'll be seeing him tomorrow. And he is a member of the COVID-19 Commission, and indeed, he is very much one of those who is an ally to the cause for women and inclusion. And let's end with you then, Dr. Raquel. Your final words to this young lady of inspiration.
Sure, thank you. And I do want to mention again also, I'm so happy that this young woman was able to be bold and brave to stand up and be so vulnerable, but also be brave enough to ask that question, because it's one that's on the mind of a lot of us. Rather than repeating some of the things that my colleagues have already talked about, which were amazing, I think I just want to talk about a couple of things. One is this concept of intersectionality, right? We are many things all at once. Obviously, we're employees. I'm also a woman, a person of color, child of immigrants, a volunteer, a friend, a daughter, many, many other things. So being aware of and celebrating that intersectionality among ourselves is really inherent to all our own identities, and it's critical to understanding some of the challenges we've been talking about. The other is this concept of belonging. You know, we can create environments that have the potential to create and sustain equity for people, and we can establish diverse groups of people, whether it's teams or boards of directors or clinical trial patient populations, but unless those same people feel as if they truly belong, we haven't succeeded. We know belonging is one of the most powerful predictors of efficacy and DEI initiatives, because when people feel that they truly belong, they're more connected, they're more engaged, and they're more committed. So for our own role, we have to be intentional, I
Well, I couldn't have ended it better. It's all about intentionality and really knowing who you are, remaining humble as well. Ladies, I would really like to thank you so, so much, Dr. McMurray, Dr. Ebere, wherever you are, and Dr. Raquel. Thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. Also, thank you to the audience. You guys have been wonderful and attentive. We really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great convention going forward. And to the young lady, where are you? There you are. I hope that you were able to take away some skills, not just the life skills, but as well as the technical skills that these ladies have imparted, and that you feel inspired to be able to go forth and do what you need to do to make change in this world. Thank you so much, and enjoy your afternoon.
Amazing.